MMIP floods the country, and you, or your tribal community, all tribal communities have dealt with MMIP and violent crimes with their individuals and tribal community members. Nehe, my name is Sarah Cochran. I come from the Aani tribe from Fort Belknap Reservation, and I will be showing you my research on the 2021 Executive Order 14053, addressing the missing and murdered peoples epidemic, signed by Joe Biden. So first off, I want to start with what is the MMIP crisis? So MMIP is defined as the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, and MMIW is missing and murdered Indigenous women. Peoples is just more inclusive because there are LGBTQ criminalization and victimization of many different individuals of the community, like children and men. So the American Indian communities, they suffer assault, they suffer abduction and murder, and many other violent crimes. So there is also a risk of human trafficking, which is why this order kind of almost targets this specific issue as well. So it's very inclusive and broad. MMIP is an epidemic that stems from 500 years of colonization efforts, and it is defined by the Department of Interior as a legacy of generations of government policies of forced removal, land seizures, and violence inflicted on Native peoples. So I want to give some historical context and historical development on MMIP. It kind of all started with colonization, which itself started in 1492. Kidnapping and murder carried out through policies given from federal government through the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th century, and that resulted in massacres, resulted in wars, boarding schools, suppression of culture and spirituality, removal, and other types of assimilation effects. There have been centuries of interracial physical and cultural violence. Interracial meaning non-native on native, so non-native to native crimes, along with colonial oppression. There has been a lack of media and investigation, and unfortunately that leads to cold cases. Today, there has been an increase in advocacy, a raise of awareness, and even have made news headlines. I do want to kind of connect other social injustices that are related to MMIP, such as poverty, such as discrimination, high rates of other violent crimes, such as domestic abuse, gender-based violence. Historical trauma has actually led to PTSD, anxiety, depression, fluctuation of household norms, etc., which makes us more vulnerable to this situation, unfortunately. There are also jurisdictional complexities. So for those of you who don't know what PL 280 is, I highly recommend you look into that because it causes a lot of confusion, actually, for many tribes about which jurisdiction can cover which crime. There is also a history of poor relationship and poor trust of law enforcement, which also leads to underreporting of cases. So a lot of cases don't get reported because we feel like they won't get prioritized, or some people make us feel like it's not important at all. There is also a lack of funding and resources, and that really makes us struggle with what we can do to help find these people, heal our people. So to give it some statistics and some proof, the FBI actually provides their reports in the missing person and unidentified persons statistics, and it provides that in 2022, 5,491 females and 4,629 males of all ages have been reported missing. And at the end of the year, the amount of active cases consisted of 658 females and 934 males of all ages. But in 2023, 5,801 females and 4,944 males of all ages were reported missing. And at the end of the year, the number of active cases were 653 females, 978 males. So there was a 625 increase between those two years. A reporter, Ray Graham, who is diligent in advocacy for this kind of issue, she states that in 2022, 84% of Indigenous women and 84% of Indigenous women and 82% of Indigenous men have experienced violent crimes in their lifetime. So now to get to the nitty-gritty, Executive Order 14053, what is it? So it supports inclusive law enforcement, it supports prevention, intervention, and other support, and it provides support services. It builds on existing policies such as the Not Invisible Act, the Savannahs Act, Tribal Law and Order Act, and we'll get into those later actually. It finds solutions towards tribal needs. It established the Missing and Murdered Unit by Deb Holland. It collaborates with tribal leaders, communities, urban organizations, and other parties, coordination among departments to end trafficking, expand participation of Native Americans in Amber Alert programs, in Indian country initiatives, protocols for culturally and linguistically appropriate communication with families and victims. To move on, the Attorney General and the Secretary of the Interior, they work with other agencies to develop guidance and training. It enables prosecution of non-natives so that tribal law enforcement is able to prosecute non-natives who indulge in these crimes. It makes grant-making operations more equitable, more accessible. It's easier to get grants. It expands tribal participation and access program for national crime info so that database info is more accessible to tribal communities. It enhances delivery of services to victims and families, such as childhood programs, mental and behavioral health programs, substance abuse programs, family support, etc. The DOJ, the DOI, the Energy, Homeland Security conduct timely consultations with tribes so that they are able to fit the needs of the multiple tribal communities. The Attorney General and Secretary of Interior, they have to develop a strategy for ongoing analysis of data collection. So it is to better understand the extent and the causes of this crisis. And this strategy plan shall be reported to the President within 240 days of the policy date. Whether this happened or not, I do not know. I'm hoping it is, though. I do want to get into these pros and cons, just to show you what are the good things, what are the bad things. So pros, there's coordination between departments and tribes. That is like required. Builds off previous policies and pushes the implementation of those policies. There are protocols and strategy plans that must be reported to the President within a certain amount of time so that he knows these are getting done. It focuses on a variety of support services for the victims, for the survivors, for secondary victims like the children who witness it, the children who are experiencing the person being lost. And it also pushes for the involvement of tribal government. On the other side, the cons, effectiveness, it really just depends on the successfulness of implementation. There is jurisdictional uncertainty that we talked about earlier. Questionable sustainability due to the shift in administrations. So right now, I really don't know how the Trump administration is going to prioritize this, if they are prioritizing it at all. Since there is a history of underreporting cases, could still possibly be the case, which could lead to more cold cases, unfortunately. There could be data collection mishaps, such as confusion on racial classification and the cause of death, so that could also be an issue. Moving on to the strengths of tribal communities themselves, because they do have a lot of strengths that this policy works off of. So they already have strong community bonds. There is a long history of resilience, community trust in tribal services, and community-based solutions. So they recognize their own vulnerabilities and they work off of that. So they create local services to provide support. They create tribal response plans. I researched the CSKT tribal response plan, which is found on the Charcusta actually. They don't really list everything on there, but they state they do have a plan. So going into the Savannahs Act of 2020, Savannah LaFountain Greywind actually was murdered at the age of 22 after her baby was removed from her womb. So this act is to improve federal response to MMIP, increase coordination between the state, local, federal, and tribal enforcement agencies. It consults with tribes to discuss how to improve tribal data relevance. It has consultations with the Office of Violence Against Women for input of improving access to the crime info databases. There is outreach and training that they provide, criminal jurisdiction and Indian country training, National Missing and Unidentified Person System, which is a resource center, which is totally free and is provided to law enforcement, medical examiners, coroners, allied forensic professionals, family members. That is all accessible, and it tailors the guidelines to specific communities because not every tribal community is the same. They have different needs. The Not Invisible Act of 2019, it provides coordination of prevention efforts, grants, and programs. Deb Haaland actually created the Not Invisible Act Commission, which is a joint commission. It is a cross-jurisdictional advisory committee, which is composed of law enforcement, tribal leaders, federal partners, family members, survivors, etc. There is cooperation with organizations to enable victim-centered and culturally relevant training to tribal law enforcement, IHS, urban Indian organizations, community members, and even businesses. And it provides how to respond and to appropriately report these instances effectively. Moving on to 2010, Tribal Law and Order Act, which was signed by President Obama. It encouraged on hiring more law enforcement for Indian lands, enhancing tribal authority to prosecute, train BIA and tribal officers, address crime in tribal communities, and places a strong emphasis on decreasing violence against American Indian and Alaskan Native women, encourages development of prevention programs for drug and alcohol abuse for at-risk youth. So as we can see through these policies, this executive order builds off of all of these policies. We're going to go under a scope and see what the differences are, because there are many differences. The Not Invisible Act, it kind of focuses more on the improvement and coordination between the different agencies and created that joint commission. So that is what was different. The Savannahs Act, it improves and focuses on data collection, law enforcement protocols, interagency coordination. It directs the Department of Justice to develop guidelines for responding to cases, and it provides training to agencies. The Tribal Law and Order Act, it enhances criminal sentencing authority to tribal courts, addresses gaps in the law enforcement investigation, and data reporting. While the executive order, it kind of like goes on a broader scope of things, of addressing the crisis, but it does directly direct the Department of Justice, DOI, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security to all work together with tribal nations, and it builds on those existing policies already. Was there any change after this policy was implemented? So there was the Missing and Murdered Unit that was established in 2021 by Deb Haaland, which is a component of the BIA and the Office of Justice Services. The responsibility of providing leadership and direction for cross-departmental and interagency work involving missing and murdered American Indians and Alaska Native. It gains access to an open source intelligence platform, contracting laboratory services in a crime lab, and it helps explain the complicated legal process to the families. Because the legal process to filing a person missing or even to try to get the person found, get them justice, it's a hard process. Recently, unfortunately, we lost a young 14-year-old girl, Emily Pike, who was part of the San Carlos Apache tribe. She was found dead on Valentine's Day this year, 3 weeks after she was declared missing. Two federal agencies, the FBI and the BIA, officially joined the investigation, but they have not made any statements on it, so at least we know they are on the case, and hopefully they get to find justice for this little girl. I do want to show you how accessible the databases are, though. So if we go to the U.S. Department of Justice, Tribal Justice and Safety, and we go to the MMIP section right here, and you go down to Data and Research, and it has all of the reports and research, like research publications, human trafficking, federal data resources and reports, tribal and state task forces data and reports. And it goes into all of these reports, which is very accessible, actually. It was very easy to find myself. So next I want to go to NAMUS? I don't know. But, and then we go to the library and multimedia reports and statistics. And it actually is all laid out right here. So they have monthly and biannual reports, which are free, like I said previously in the other slide. It is easy to find, open to anyone to use, which I found very, very accessible. It was very easy for me to find. So I want to give a reflection on, is there any improvement for this policy that can be done? Unfortunately, the issue will always continue. It will always be a thing in the United States. It will never, ever extinguish, unfortunately. With the administration change, there is a change in prioritization. So the Biden administration highly prioritized MMIP and prioritized tribal communities, but with the Trump administration, unfortunately, it is very, very uncertain whether or not we will get any spotlight at all or any help at all. There are many policies already that target this issue. So this policy builds off of it. And because it is all, the success is all due to the implementation, I don't know whether or not the Trump administration will implement these other policies, prioritize them. There could be tribal publications. I don't know if tribal publications are accessible for MMIP or of that sort. Like I mentioned previously, PL2ED, it grants certain states some civil and criminal jurisdiction. There is no regulatory power, though. And violent crimes such as sexual abuse is open to federal, state, and tribal jurisdictions. So it just depends on where you want it to go. I think we can prioritize PL280. I think there will be some change with PL280 at CSKT. I don't know if that will benefit us or knock us down, so we will just have to wait and see. Looking at the economic climate, are we in for a battle? We are already at a lack of funding for this issue and for many other issues and other departments and other services for tribal communities. There is uncertainty due to the new Trump administration. He has already had funding cuts for multiple departments. In the DEI orders, he resigned it, so I'm very uncertain on whether or not we will have any funding. Executive Order 14053. It makes grant making more impartial for tribal communities seeking for law enforcement. So even though this order makes grant making more equitable, I don't know if that will really happen, unfortunately. This provides services for victims, survivors, and families, so I am very much hoping that something changes. This policy will continue on. Prioritization continues on because this is a massive epidemic. It's not even an issue anymore, it's an epidemic. It hurts families, it causes generational trauma within itself. Children are affected, families are affected, tribal communities are affected. It hurts. It's going to hurt. But if we keep on the awareness, if we keep on the prevention, if we keep on self-advocacy and community advocacy, word can travel fast. Word of mouth is the best traveler of news. So if we keep saying these people's names, if we keep sharing these stories, one way or another, they're going to reach the people that will actually make the change. So I highly encourage you to research Emily Pike, to hear the news, to research all of these people that have gone missing, that have been victimized, that have been murdered. Jermaine Charlo is still missing to this day. So there are many other people that are still missing to this day and that need to be found, that need to have justice, people who are murdered. Some of these people are just children. Emily Pike was only 14 years old. She loved the color pink. She loved art. She had so many hobbies. We are putting these people who have dreams and goals and are just human at risk. We are all just people. And I just want to say thank you. So here are my resources. If you can go to the FBI Missing and Unidentified Persons database, it is all provided yearly. NAMUS is free, so please please use that. It's accessible, it's free. Thank you.